Well, yesterday we told you all about how the New York Times has apologized for its coverage of Donald Trump during the campaign. In a way, the paper is pledged to rededicate itself to honesty. So how is that project going a day in? Here's a look at some of the New York Times headlines from this morning. Quote, Trump staff shakeup slows transition. Okay. Next, Trump is criticized for hard right pick. Getting warmer. From the fringe to the White House, adding a little subjectivity into the headline. Next, Putin and Trump agree in a phone call to improve ties. All right, the obligatory Putin headline. And finally, here's something all American voters are deeply worried about. After Trump's win, what's next for Mexico? That answers the question that you've been wondering about. Joining us now to digest all this, Ben Dominant. She's publisher at The Federalist, and Stephen Dinan, our friend from the Washington Times. It's great to see you both. So you're a longtime newspaper man. You've been in this business your whole life.
I have.
When you're sitting around the budget meeting trying to figure out headlines, does someone pipe up and say, I wonder how this is going down in Mexico? Is that like even in the top 1,000 questions you have about an election result?
No, it's not. Look, these guys, the New York Times, I actually interpreted their statement yesterday a little differently. I didn't see that as an apology for their coverage. I saw that as look, their readers expected them to be much harder on Donald Trump than they were, and their readers, frankly, expected them to be softer on Hillary Clinton when they were. They've got a balancing act to do there, and I interpreted the last line of that where they said, we have a duty to our readers, basically saying, hey, look, we know what you expect. We're going to make sure to give that to you in a
So there's a very specific, but there are only so many people who live at 82nd and Broadway. Do you know what I mean? So, like, they have in mind a very specific reader when they're doing their stories, no?
They do, and I understand what you're saying about being harder on him and softer on her, but I think that what they actually really expected was for the New York Times to be right. About what was going to happen in this election. I think the real problem that they have here, and it's illustrated by these headlines, is even if they may talk about rededicating themselves to fairness or something that is a bit more responsible in covering politics, the fact is they don't know what they don't know. They don't know the fact of what it's like to be a Trump voter, to live in a Trump county, to participate in the kind of social activities and cultural activities that those voters participate in. And I think the real problem is that the New York Times, along with so many other media organizations, got so in their bubble during the course of this election that they were incapable of covering it fairly, incapable of predicting it accurately.
I think that's right. So, I mean, the criticism is we're holding the New York Times to a higher standard, and I'll plead guilty to that. I do. It's an important newspaper, and they ought to be trying harder to be objective than other people try. But when you put words like fringe or hard right into a headline, entirely subjective words that have no fixed definition at all, that are only in the eye of the beholder, you're making an editorial statement, aren't you?
Go back to the second tax story they did on Donald Trump and taxes at the end of October, and that story read far more like a column than a news story. There was some point during this election which, when it became clear that Trump actually was headed for a victory in the Republican primary, a lot of news organizations sort of stepped back and looked and said, whoa, we haven't been hard enough on him. And they went ahead and they started crossing a lot of those boundaries and a lot of those lines. They absolutely did that. And I think what they're going through a reevaluation whether that was correct to do or not. That's obviously the statement you saw. I got to be, I guess I would say we do have to remember the New York Times are the ones who also exposed the Hillary Clinton secret email server publicly. So they were, to be fair, fairly tough on both candidates.
And they're some good reporters, but this is how car crashes always begin, by going too far in one direction and wildly overcorrecting into a tree.
It's also a situation, I think, frankly, with a lot of media organizations, not just the Times, but I would particularly point to this. In the last month of this campaign, a lot of media organizations made the calculation that the likelihood of Hillary's win was so huge that they no longer sent people out into the field to talk to a lot of voters who were out there who had strong opinions in the opposite direction. Right. And I think that showed in the way that they covered this, especially in the waning days of the campaign.
Right. I mean, this is always the problem. You know what you know. You know what you're going to find, and then with no capacity left for surprise, you find what you think you're going to find, even if it's not there.
You said a minute ago, and I think it's exactly right, that we have for a very long time held the New York Times to a higher standard. Yes. We expected them to do better than every other news organization out there. I no longer think that's true. I think that they have a readership they're responding to, and like every other readership, that readership has become very polarized. And they are responding to that
leadership. No, that's totally right. And that's why I'm not as mad at the Washington Post. I've always thought it was a piece of garbage newspaper, and now it's been proven. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm not crestfallen to learn that. Are you?
It's from my perspective, I think that they're responsible journalists who work at both organizations. Yes. But I think that unfortunately their views, which actually were a lot more colored, had a lot more gray area to them, were not the ones that were on the front page. They were the stories you had to look at. And now, after all of this is over, you can go back and you can find here and there these different dots that could be connected that showed, hey, Hillary Clinton's really going to underperform among African Americans. Hey, there is something going on with the white working class across middle America that's different than maybe what we've seen before.
But they always let the 25-year-old sneering Ivy League guy who doesn't have any experience of anything write the page one stories. Why do they do that?
That's why you end up with these kind of headlines that are so colored by politics.
You guys are great. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Tucker.